Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the relationship skills men realize they need after it's too late episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are rebuilding their lives and relationships after breakup or divorce, helping them understand their relationship patterns, grow into the best version of themselves, and create deeper love and real connection, showing up differently for the next chapter of their lives so they can live the life they love. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about something I wish someone had taught me years ago. Not how to find the right woman, no dating advice, not even how to keep a relationship exciting. I wish someone had taught me relationship skills, actual skills. You know, the kind that help you navigate the moments that matter most. Because here's what I learned. Love is incredibly important, but love by itself isn't enough. You know, the Beatles had a nice song, All You Need Is Love, right? But healthy relationships require healthy skills. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't realize that until we're standing in the middle of losing someone we love. And as I continue this series on becoming a man capable of a healthy relationship, you know that's what all this has really been about. In this episode, I think we arrive at one of the most practical conversations in this series. Because here's the truth. Most men don't lose relationships because they don't care. Most men lose relationships because nobody ever taught them the skills a healthy relationship requires. Yeah, man, when I look back over my own life, there's one thought that comes to me over and over again. I wish I'd learned these skills much earlier. And looking back now, I can honestly say that learning relationship skills earlier may have saved me from going through 3 divorces. Not because I didn't love my partners, I did. Not because I didn't want my marriages to work, I absolutely did. But wanting something and having the skills to create it are 2 entirely different things. And the interesting thing is, it wasn't until my 3rd marriage that I finally started really learning those skills. And unfortunately, by then, it was too late. The damage had already been done. That marriage ended too. But here's the part of the story I wouldn't change. Not for anything. Because every relationship taught me something. Every mistake humbled me. Every heartache forced me to look at the man in the mirror. And every divorce became a part of my education, how I grew. Yeah, man, these experiences shaped the man I eventually became, and they prepared me for the relationship I have today with my wife. We've now been together for more than 17 years. And honestly, I believe one of the biggest reasons our relationship has been so healthy isn't because we found the perfect relationship. It's because we both learned healthier relationship skills. Do we still get things wrong sometimes? Of course. We're human, but now we have the skills to find our way back to each other. And when I look back over everything I've been through, I can honestly say I wouldn't change any of it. Because those experiences not only helped me become the husband I am today, they also helped me understand the men who I work with in my coaching practice. You know, when a man says, I don't know why she keeps saying she doesn't feel heard. Well, I've heard that before. When he says, I feel like nothing I do is ever enough. I've felt that too. Not because I read it in a book, but because I lived it. And that's what brings me to a man I'll call Marcus. That's not his real name, but his story is. When Marcus first reached out to me, he wasn't looking for personal growth. No, man. He wasn't looking to become more emotionally intelligent. He wasn't asking how to become the best version of himself. He just wanted one thing, and that was to save his relationship. He'd been with Bella, not her real name either. He'd been with Bella for almost 4 years. He loved her. He truly did. But he felt like no matter how hard he tried, they kept having the same arguments over and over again. And when we sat down together, he started telling me about the complaints Bella had been making for years, saying that he didn't listen, that she didn't feel seen, that he shuts down whenever they would have a disagreement. Then he looked at me and said something I've heard from so many men over the years. "Bill, I'm doing the best I can." And I remember smiling, not because what he said was funny, but because I had said those exact same words many years earlier. I told him, "I know, man, I believe you." Because, you see, Marcus wasn't trying to hurt Bella. He was just doing exactly what a lot of us men do. He was responding the only way he'd ever learned, how he was conditioned, and how most of us are. But the problem was, what he had learned in that conditioning wasn't working. Then he told me about the time everything came crashing down. Bella's sister was getting married. The wedding had been planned for months. Then one of Marcus's buddies called and said he had an extra ticket to a Sixers game. And Marcus thought he had come up with the perfect compromise. He'd go to the game, then he'd meet Bella at the reception afterward. And to him, that seemed reasonable. And he told her, "Look, I'll still be there." But what Marcus couldn't see was what Bella was actually hearing. She wasn't hearing, "I'll meet you later." She was hearing, "Basketball is more important than standing beside you on one of the biggest days in your family's life." So you can see the difference here, right? Intentions and impact are not always the same thing. Well, anyway, Bella was devastated. She got really angry. And in the middle of the argument, she'd said something she had never said before. She says, "I think we should break up." And Marcus told me that he just stared at her in disbelief of her saying that, but he truly believed she meant it. And that's when fear finally broke through his defenses. And that was the reason he had reached out to me. And I'll never forget what I said to him during that first meeting. I looked him in the eye and I said, "Marcus, listen, man, I can't promise I'll save your relationship." He looked disappointed. Then I said, "But I can help save you." I let him know that my job isn't to convince Bella to stay. My job is to help you become the kind of man who brings his healthiest self, his best version of himself, into a relationship. And if that saves this relationship, great. If it doesn't, you'll have the skills no one can ever take away from you. And he sat with that for a minute and was like, "Okay, I'm ready." And I got to say, that may have been the most important moment of our entire time together. Not because he had learned anything yet, but because he became willing to learn. And that's where change always begins. So over the next few weeks, Marcus started telling me more about the conversations he and Bella had been having. He'd describe an argument, and I'd occasionally stop him and would ask him if I could show him another way that he could have responded. I just wanted him to see that there was another possibility, another way of listening, another way of responding, and another way of staying present. And then sometimes I'd ask him what he thought Bella was actually needing from him in certain moments. And he'd be really honest and say, "I don't know." And that was okay, because for the first time, he was willing to ask himself that question. And little by little, he started recognizing patterns he'd never seen before. He could finally understand why Bella kept saying she didn't feel heard. Not because he didn't care, but because he kept listening through the filter of his own intentions, instead of realizing the impact his behavior was having on her. Well, one day, Marcus got it. He looked at me and said, "I understand it now. I just don't know if I can actually do it." And it caused me to laugh because I knew exactly how he felt. And I gave him an analogy, and I said, "Marcus, you remember the first time you drove a car, how awkward it felt? You had to think about everything. But eventually, you didn't." Well, relationship skills work exactly the same way. At first they feel unnatural. You'll forget about what you learned, you'll make mistakes, and it's natural to fall back into your old habits. But every time you practice, you're creating a new pattern. And eventually it becomes a part of who you are. Well, after explaining all that to him, something shifted. And I could see like the load off his shoulders softening. He stopped trying to be perfect and he became willing to practice. And again, that's where real growth begins, that willingness. Marcus's story isn't that unusual. In fact, after working with a lot of men for more than 20 years, and after living through my own 3 divorces before building the healthy marriage I have today, I can tell you that his story is one I've heard in different forms over and over again. Yeah, it's good men who love deeply, who would do almost anything for the people they love, and yet they're missing just this handful of relationship skills that no one ever taught them. The good news, though, is skills can be learned. And that's exactly what Marcus discovered. Over the next 3 months, we didn't spend our time trying to fix Bella. We focused on Marcus, because the only person we can ever truly change is ourselves. And week after week, after practicing these skills, and at first it was awkward, and again, just like learning how to drive or learning how to play a new instrument or any new skill, there were times where Marcus would have this conversation with Bella and be like, "Oh man, I forgot everything we talked about." And I'm like, "I know, man, so did I. That's how it works." And, I told him when I was learning these skills, I didn't magically get them right overnight either. Because growth doesn't happen because we become perfect. Growth happens because we become willing to practice. And with that, something pretty amazing started to happen with Marcus. He wasn't just becoming a better partner, he was becoming a healthier man. And then something happened that neither of us expected. The healthier Marcus became, the more distant Bella became. And at first, he was confused. He couldn't understand it. He was finally communicating differently, listening differently. He was taking responsibility and accountability for himself. He was repairing after conflict and argument. But he couldn't understand why it felt like the relationship was slipping further away. And then one day he looked at me and said, "Bill, I don't think this relationship is healthy." And I asked him why he thought that way. And he said that no matter what he did, there was always another complaint or criticism or another reason that he wasn't enough. Now, I want to interrupt myself here and be careful, because this wasn't about blaming Bella. She had her own story, her own wounds, her own experiences, just like Marcus did. But something had changed. Marcus could finally see the relationship clearly, not through fear of losing her or feeling desperate, and not through the hope that if he just tried harder, everything would magically work out. He was seeing it through the eyes of a healthier man. Now, if this were a Hollywood movie, this is where I'd tell you they got back together. But that's not what happened. Marcus made one of the hardest decisions of his life. He ended the relationship. And frankly, I think the real ending is even more beautiful than a Hollywood ending. Yeah, because Marcus didn't lose. He grew. He discovered that learning healthy relationship skills isn't just about saving a relationship. Sometimes it's about discovering whether the relationship is healthy enough to save. And that's a very different question. And it's one worth thinking about. Here's what I want you to take away from Marcus's story. No one ever loses by becoming a healthier man, right? Whether your current relationship grows stronger, whether it ends, or whether you're preparing for the next chapter of your life, the work is never wasted. No, man, it becomes a part of who you are. And that brings us to something researchers have been telling us for years. Healthy relationships aren't built on chemistry alone. They're built on habits, on behaviors, and skills. As a matter of fact, one of the world's leading relationship researchers, Dr. John Gottman, who I talk about a lot, has spent decades of studying thousands of couples. And his research found that what predicts long-term relationship success isn't the absence of conflict. It's how couples respond during conflict. The healthiest couples aren't the ones who never argue. They're the ones who know how to repair after they do. Think about that for a minute. It's not perfection, it's repair. And man, that one insight alone changed the way I looked at relationships. Because when I was younger, I thought a good relationship meant not having problems. Now I understand that a healthy relationship isn't one without arguments or conflict. It's one where two people have the skills to find their way back to each other. Healthy couples simply become skilled at reconnecting. So let's get into some of the relationship skills that, in my experience, most men don't realize they need until it's almost too late. First is, as I mentioned, repair, learning to repair. And I touched on this with Marcus. Think about it. Every relationship has its moments, again, where someone feels hurt, misunderstood, disappointed, or disconnected. All that's normal. The question isn't whether you'll experience these moments. The question is, what do you do next? Years ago, my answer was usually one of three things. I'd defend myself, I'd explain why I wasn't wrong, or I'd hope enough time would pass that everything would just blow over. And maybe you've done that too. But here's what I've learned. Time doesn't repair relationships. People do. Sometimes repair sounds like, I'm sorry. I can see how that hurt you. Or sometimes it's, help me understand what that felt like for you. Or even saying, I wish I'd handled that differently. And if you notice that none of those responses require you to be weak, they require you to be emotionally mature. And that's a whole different thing. Another skill is emotional regulation, learning how to regulate your emotions. And I used to think emotional regulation meant keeping my emotions under control. In reality, it meant keeping my emotions bottled up, not allowing myself to feel. Real emotional regulation isn't pretending that you're fine. It's recognizing what you're feeling. It's slowing yourself down and choosing your responses instead of simply reacting. Researchers have found that when we're emotionally flooded, when our heart rate spikes and our nervous system shifts into survival mode, we literally lose access to parts of the brain responsible for empathy, reasoning, and good decision-making. So no wonder we say things that we regret later, right? That's why learning to pause, to breathe, and to recognize what's happening inside of us, that can completely change the direction of a conversation. And I've learned over the years that even one regulated person can often help regulate the entire relationship. Another skill is listening without becoming defensive. So let me ask you, have you ever felt yourself listening not to understand, but to prepare for your response? Be honest, because I know I have. Someone would tell me they were hurt, and before they even finished talking, I'd already built my defense. Saying things like, oh, no, that's not what I meant, or you're misunderstanding me, or you're overreacting. Well, the problem is, when someone feels unheard, explaining more rarely helps, okay? What they usually need first is to feel understood. One of the greatest gifts we can offer another person isn't advice. Most people don't want to hear it. It's our full attention. Sometimes the most healing words we can say are, tell me more, or I never thought about it that way, or even, I can understand why you'd feel that way. And again, if you notice, understanding someone's feelings doesn't necessarily mean you agree with everything they come up with. It simply means you're willing to see the world through their eyes for a moment. And that's empathy. Another skill I want to mention is healthy boundaries. And man, for the longest time, I misunderstood boundaries. I thought boundaries were like walls, but they're not. Healthy boundaries don't keep people out. They help healthy people come closer. They allow us to be honest about what we need, what we're willing to accept, and where our responsibility ends. Another skill is vulnerability. And if you had asked a younger version of me what vulnerability meant, I probably would have said weakness. But today, I define it very differently. Vulnerability is the courage to let someone see the real you. Not the confident version of you, not the successful version or the version that has all the answers. I'm talking the real you, the one who's scared sometimes, the one who gets hurt, and the one who's still learning. And I've discovered something over the years, man. People don't build deep connection because someone's impressive, They build deep connection because someone is genuine. And that's something that many of us were never taught. No, man, we were taught to perform, to achieve, to provide. But rarely were we taught how to simply be emotionally present. And yet, that's often what our partners are longing for the most. They're not asking us to be perfect. They're asking us to be present. One more skill I wish someone had taught me years ago, and that is consistency. Now, when most people hear that word, they think about showing up on time, right? Like keeping your promises, follow through. And yes, those things matter. But consistency goes much deeper than that. I'm talking emotional consistency. Because consistency creates predictability, and predictability creates trust. Think about it this way. Trust isn't usually built in those big moments, right? It's built in hundreds of ordinary, everyday moments. Keeping your word, following through, showing up, listening, repairing, and doing it again, and again. Those moments tell someone, you're safe with me. See what I'm getting at? These aren't isolated skills. They all work together like a team, like instruments in an orchestra. And again, the beautiful thing is they can all be learned, no matter how old you are, no matter what your past relationships looked like, no matter how many mistakes you've made, you are not too late. And understand, the fact that you're listening to this, you're already doing something the younger version of me never had the chance to do. You're learning these skills now. And that's hopeful. So if you're feeling encouraged by what I'm talking about, I'd love to invite you to take the next step. If you're rebuilding after breakup or divorce, or simply want to become the man capable of creating a healthier relationship, then please visit my website, manonthepathtolove.com. You'll find podcast episodes, articles, and coaching resources to help you continue growing one step at a time. That's menonthepachtolove.com. And now it's time for my quote of the week, and it's from psychiatrist and author and Holocaust survivor who I've quoted before, Viktor Frankl. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And to me, that's what relationship skills really are. Learning how to use that space. And that's what this entire series has been about. Becoming the man capable of creating the kind of relationship you truly want. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the relationship skills most men realize they need after it's too late episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thank you so much for listening. Now, coming up next time on the Men on the Path to Love podcast, as I continue my series on becoming the man capable of a healthy relationship, I'm going to talk about something that had a profound impact on me, not only as a husband, but as a man. And that's creating safety in relationship. If you think about it, every relationship skill I talked about in this episode, they all have one thing in common. They help create something every healthy relationship needs, and that's emotional safety. And the interesting thing is, most of us were never taught what it actually means to be a safe man. I know I wasn't. In fact, when I first heard that phrase years ago, I completely misunderstood it. So here's the question I'd like for you to think about this week. When the people you love are struggling, do they instinctively move toward you or away from you? Give that some serious thought, because that awareness alone could change everything in your relationships. Please join me for the Becoming a Safe Man episode. I think it may be one of the most important episodes in this entire series. And if you know someone who needs to hear the episode you've been listening to, then please share the link and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.